veto is a disgrace.
Downing Street's refused to say whether it will allow Ukraine to fire long-range British missiles into Russia. President Biden's given Kyiv the go-ahead to use US weapons within Russian territory. Sir Keir Starmer's insisted a strong relationship between the UK and China is important for both countries after meeting Xi Jinping. He's become the first Prime Minister to meet the Chinese president since 2018. It's predicted household energy prices will go up in the new year. Cornwall Insight expects the regulator Ofgem to increase its price cap by 1% in January. And a man's admitted owning a dangerously out-of-control XL bully dog that killed his neighbour. 54-year-old Ian Langley suffered fatal injuries near Sunderland last October. In the city, the FTSE 100's closed at 45.8109. The pound buys $1.26 and €1.19. LBC weather, rain, sleet and snow for central areas tonight, a low of -6. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello and welcome to Monday's Cross Question. It's coming up to 3 minutes past 8. I'm Iain Dale. With me on the panel, to my left, Tessa Dunlop, historian, author and broadcaster. Next to her, Jerry Hayes, barrister and former Conservative MP. To my right, New Labour MP for Derby North, Catherine Atkinson. And Alys Denby, opinion and features editor at City AM. So many subjects that you could ring in about tonight. 0345 6060 973. You can WhatsApp us on that number. You can text 84850. And we'd love you to watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Right, let's start with the text question from Scott in West Hampstead, who says, should the British government wait for Donald Trump to become the US president again before making any decision about allowing Ukraine to use the UK's long-range Storm Shadow missiles? And should we also consult with our NATO allies in Europe? Jerry Hayes.
No. The simple thing, Scott, is at the end of the day, we are a sovereign country. America is our greatest partner. We work with the president. The president at the moment is Joe Biden. As for Europe, they don't really have a foreign policy as such. So let's leave it as it is at the moment and see how it comes out.
Well, they have a high representative, don't they? Isn't that what
yes, I know,
called?
But who is she? Or her?
I think
or him?
Mr. Burrell.
Mr. Burrell, you just made that up.
No, I didn't. That is his name, but I don't know what his
first name is. I bet you didn't know that, Catherine. I didn't. Did you? Did anyone? They all lie.
I do know that Germany is the biggest donor in Europe, including Britain, in terms of aid and armaments to Ukraine.
Yeah. But Scholz hasn't been a good friend to Ukraine, has he?
Historically, they were very slow out of the traps, but I think that for obvious historic reasons, Germany is always fearful to be a leader when it comes to military matters. But I think absolutely, I thought we led on this anyway. David Cameron, it was one of the few memorable things he did, was actually come out and say, guess what? Ukraine should be allowed to fight a war without its hands tied behind its back.
Alys.
I think what I found very frustrating about this situation at the moment is it's difficult to work out as an observer, as someone who's not a military strategist. I don't know anything much about these missiles or how Ukraine might use them. What's frustrating is America's making it difficult to tell if giving them these weapons is the right thing to do or the politically expedient thing to do for Joe Biden in the dying days of his administration. Is he just trying to make life as difficult as possible for Trump when he comes in? Or does he actually think that this is necessary to help Volodymyr Zelensky win the war? I don't know. And that's what I'm finding very difficult to unscramble. It seems to me that Ukraine is fighting a war to protect all of Europe's democracy, that Putin has made it clear that he does not intend to stop. Ukraine is trying to contain this war within its borders, and we should support it to do everything it can because all of our freedom depends on it.
Yeah. Catherine.
I'm not going to comment on defence strategy, but absolutely we are clear that we will be supporting Ukraine for as long as it takes. And I do think that when it comes to national security, that means that we ensure that Ukraine has security as well. We're coming up to the 1,000th day.
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow's the 1,000th day since Russia illegally invaded the Ukraine. What he's put that country through is unbelievable, and I'm really pleased that it's absolutely at the top of Keir Starmer's agenda, and he is out there shoring up support for Ukraine.
Unfortunately, Trump is going to come in, and there's going to have to be some pivoting by Keir Starmer and David Lammy, because we all agree with this. But
you just said we were a sovereign country. Why do we have to pivot just because Trump's coming?
We're a sovereign country, but we've got to use common sense as well.
That doesn't automatically mean that we have to be America's lapdog.
No, we don't have to be America's lapdog. We've got to understand where interests come from. And two, they're our greatest. We export more to them than any other country.
There is going to be no pivot. The support for Ukraine is something that they will have from this country for as long as they need it. I mean, David Lammy came and visited Derby, where I'm the MP, and met with the Ukrainian community there, and he is absolutely clear that he is going to be supporting Ukraine going forward.
The other thing that's really interesting is that I noticed a whole bunch of Republicans are jumping up and down today. Putin says we mustn't do this. Since when did we take our lead from Vladimir Putin? This is really obvious war strategy. If Donald Trump is going to force some uncomely peace, and by the way, I'd like to see him try and do it, tell the Ukrainians and the Russians what they're going to do on the other side of the world, I think he'll have a job in his hands. But if he's going to try and force some kind of peace, Ukraine needs to get ahead of the game as far as it can, so it actually has something to bring to the negotiating table. And if that means smashing into Russia a bit more, fair play. I thought their move earlier this year, when they actually took the fight to the enemy, was inspired. I tell you what, I think Volodymyr Zelensky, I'm not ashamed to say I've actually got a picture of him on my wall.
No, he's a great man.
I have one as well, although I haven't hung it yet.
Well, that doesn't count then, Ian. Where is it? Under your pillow?
I've got this poster. You know those Obama posters? It's a bit like that style. Yeah. And it is framed and it's ready to go on a wall, but I haven't got any space yet.
There will be a dirty deal. There will be a dirty deal.
Well, all wars end in some sort of settlement.
Absolutely right. Will it be the Crimea? And the party lines we all trot out from time to time. Oh yes, it's for the Ukrainians to decide. Actually, it's not. It's for the world leaders. How low are we going to sink? And this is going to be a problem for you, Catherine.
I'm really pleased that we are putting in...
He's calling you a world leader.
I think that might be a bit of an upgrade that I wasn't expecting quite yet.
There will be
I like the quite yet.
You will smell the burning rubber, and you will hear the screech of the U-turn your government will make, and you're going to have to take a position on it. The whips will just say the line to take is this. I'm not criticising you. You just started. But it's a dirty old business, politics.
I'm sure I'll get a fair amount more advice going forward, and not just tonight. But I do think that the $3 billion that this country will be putting in to support Ukraine, the further efforts that we'll be making and using frozen Russian assets to support Ukraine, we are in it for as long as it takes. And for me, I'm absolutely proud that that's our position.
I really do. I don't think you are, but I hope you're right.
Alys, what do you expect Donald Trump to do when he comes in? Because he said he'll solve this within 24 hours. Now, obviously, that was a bit of hyperbole, but clearly there's going to be a very different strategy from the American administration.
Yeah, I think Trump wants to see a negotiated end to this war, and I think actually stepping back, how is there going to be a military victory? We say we'll stick with Ukraine for as long as it takes, but what does that mean? I don't see how actually this war can come to an end with a military victory. I think it will have to be a negotiated settlement, and the question then will be, if Trump is trying to pressure Zelensky into giving up territory, what does Keir Starmer do? Does he support our stronger ally Trump, or does he support Volodymyr Zelensky? I don't envy the decision.
I think he's been absolutely clear in his position, and he is there at the G20 right now, shoring up support for Ukraine.
But if we're honest, Catherine, he talks in platitudes, and I don't blame him, because that's predominantly what you do when you're penned in as a Prime Minister. But the truth is, the peace will only be durable if we give Ukraine sufficient guarantees that Vladimir Putin doesn't try and regroup and then bust back through that fake border that will be erected in the wake of this Trump peace, i.e., to what extent is Ukraine going to be allowed to be part of NATO, so that if Russia do breach their promises, which they will, incidentally, give them 5 years, they always have. History tells us they always have. Is that then going to trigger our boots on the ground in support of Ukraine, because I think that's what it'll take to
So
stop this
what is
happening
the
again.
dirty deal going to be? Oh, Crimea, yeah. What about bits of the Donbass?
Oh, yeah, that's all gone. I agree. That's all gone already.
That's all gone. So we are part of this dirty deal. But isn't the essence of the Falklands and Margaret Thatcher, I don't think, oh, God, how terrible, is that force mustn't pay. Force must not pay.
If Putin wins, we all lose. And that is why Ukrainian security is security.
Don't forget, he did tell us that he wasn't going to invade Ukraine. He promised. So how can you trust him to do a deal? But a deal will be done.
And the thing is, the West's weakness emboldens him. It was our failure in Syria, our failures when he invaded Crimea in the first place to take any notice at all, that has emboldened him to take this full invasion. And yes, we should not be sending the message that bullying wins.
Yeah, and arguably getting rid of Biden will help, because it was Biden 6 months before the invasion of Ukraine who that debacle he presided over in Afghanistan was a clear green light for Putin. You know, who would want the West as an ally these days? Question mark.
Well, Iain, you've managed to come to a point where we're all agreeing that we can't,
I know, and I haven't
can't
really
allow
spoken
bullies to
much,
win.
which is exactly how it should be. That's how Corey likes it.
Yes.
What's your opinion?
You've all done terribly well, and you haven't had to shut Jerry up yet, Tessa.
I think Catherine needs extra long Mrs. Tickle arms, though. Maybe clamping
We should explain that on another channel, Tessa and Jerry had a bit of an altercation, didn't you, Tessa?
Yeah, it was one of those things I'd thought I'd buried in the deep, dark past. But you can rely on Iain to dig up the skeletons, can't you?
Basically, you put your hand over his mouth to shut him up, which we've all been tempted to do from time to time.
There is context. He was climate denying, and I'm not excusing violence. I would never condone violence, incidentally, especially not in the domestic arena. But I had a very vocal 5-year-old, and certainly I would never do this. But you know that thing where you occasionally want to sort of gently gesticulate to your 5-year-old, you know, hand over mouth, do be quiet, stop screaming. And that's all I was trying to do.
But no, that's what you did.
Well, I know.
And then I thought, this is good TV, I'm going to camp it up. So I said,
camp it up?
I know. You've assaulted me. And then Jacob Rees-Mogg, whose programme it was going, he said something in Latin, didn't he?
Oh, probably. But by that stage, I'd realised this was going to cost me a lot of money on all the conservative royal channels I work on.
It's usually my 3-year-old who's trying to put her mouth at her.
Anyway, I'm sure we'd like a reenactment a little later.
No, we don't. We are friends.
Let's go to a break, and we'll take some more questions in a moment. 0345 6060 973. It's 8:15.
This is LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
Let me reintroduce my panel. Journalist Alys Denby from City AM is here. Charlotte Atkinson, Labour MP for Derby North. Tessa Dunlop, historian, author and broadcaster, possibly soon to be podcaster.
Ooh.
And Jerry, yes, seriously.
Yes.
Jerry Hayes, barrister and former Conservative MP. Right, Stephen Wyndham says, will farmers blocking roads be treated the same as Just Stop Oil protesters? And what a good question that is. The Metropolitan Police has today denied claims that it's banned farmers from bringing their tractors to tomorrow's protest in Westminster, adding that hundreds of officers will be deployed during the demonstration. Just Stop Oil activists who planned demonstrations which would have involved blocking motorways were jailed for up to 5 years. Catherine, many farms in Derby North?
There aren't many farms in Derby North, but we have some absolutely beautiful countryside and farms in the wider Derbyshire area. And I don't know what the plans have been or the permissions have been when it comes to how the protest will take place tomorrow. But it is a serious issue. We have a lot of people that will be coming, and I think as always, this government will be listening and engaging with farmers.
But they haven't listened very much so far. I mean, they've really dug their heels in on this.
Well, I think I do really hope that those that come take some time to look at the detail of the mitigations that are being put in place, because I certainly the economic inheritance that Rachel Reeves got is not one that she
don't
chose.
say a 22 billion. Please.
There have been some really difficult decisions that had to be taken, but on this they've done a lot to try and mitigate and protect family farms, which is why they are looking at this really only affecting up to farms that can be up to £3 million before this actually starts biting. And then you've got half the rate, and they've got 10 years with no interest to pay it back. So I think that this was trying to solve what was an inheritance tax dodge, and it is really important that we continue to support our farmers and are doing so with £5 billion. But certainly over the last few governments, I think farmers have been hugely let down, with 12,000 farms and agricultural businesses which have ended up going bust.
Yeah, but just look at the optics of all of this. This is a budget which most budgets unravel at the weekend, don't they? Pasties, the omni-shambles George Osborne budget. But this just seems to be wrong in principle. Basically, you say the government is listening, but the fact is, did they listen about the pensioners? That was totally unnecessary. The pensioners, the winter fuel payment is insane. People like me shouldn't get it. I'm 71, but I shouldn't get it. All you have to do at the Treasury is say,
You never are. Sorry, a bit of a delay there, wasn't there?
I know, thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, it's just ridiculous. You just say anyone who's high rate tax doesn't do it. But you've gone to the ditch to die in it, which is insane. NI, when you're talking about doctors, GP surgeries, pharmacists, my God, that's insane.
Yeah. Tessa, you have my permission.
And lastly, we come to the farmers. Yes, there are people who've been taking advantage of the filthy, rich conglomerations. Do them over. The Treasury can do it. You can pass the legislation.
But Catherine, they're the ones that are going to be strengthened by this, because if small family farms go out of business because they can't afford to pay this extra tax, it'll be the big conglomerations that will buy them up. So all you will then have are these big farms.
I think that if you've got at the moment people buying up agricultural land because they're just trying to avoid inheritance tax rather than actually trying to farm it, I think that's not something that's going to be good.
That's the point. Stop them.
They want to have hospitals that actually work. They want to have healthy workforces. They want to be able to ensure that their children are educated in schools that are not crumbling. And this budget is getting our finances back.
I challenge you to get out of the House of Commons tomorrow and go and talk to the farmers on their tractors and put that point to them.
You don't have to.
I think what I would say, this isn't a dodge or a tax loophole. This is a tax system that was deliberately designed to recognise that farmers are asset rich on paper, but run businesses with incredibly tight profit margins, businesses that are essential for our food security. And I feel like this budget is a budget. Of course, you wanted to invest in public services. I understand that you've picked the winners, but that also necessarily involves picking losers. And it feels like this government thinks that all farmers are sort of rich Tory toffs going around in Land Rovers with Wellington boots. They're not. They're business people who work incredibly incredibly hard.
And that's exactly why the mitigations have been put in. But I would also
the NFU says this is going to affect 66% of farms. It's not.
I think that the government are able to see what the claims have been made. But I would also absolutely challenge when it comes to things like national insurance. The reason that they've put more money in people's pockets through lifting up the minimum wage, making sure making sure you've actually got proper public sector pay, making sure that they've got 22 billion going into the NHS. We need to ensure that we actually have not just fixing the foundations of the economy, but actually putting money into our public services. And what we did clearly inherit, what we absolutely inherited was public services on their knees.
But just to explain, how does effectively penalising small companies by an extra £2,500 per employee on minimum wage, how does that encourage job creation, and how does it encourage companies to pay their workers more for next year? Because they'll be saying, well, A, we can't give you a pay rise this year, and B, we're going to have to make redundancies because this is costing us £2,500 per employee.
I think it really is important to kind of put it into context. I think, and most businesses aren't employers at all. The majority of
What? Most businesses aren't employers.
Most businesses aren't employers because they're sole traders. They are plumbers and electricians, and that is what the vast majority. I think the vast majority of businesses are not employers. But of the employers that we have, you're in a situation where actually the majority are not going to pay any more or the same as they're already paying.
Tessa.
865,000 won't pay any national insurance at all. And yes, this is going to impact upon the bigger employers.
But if you're employing more than 4 people, you will.
The 2% largest, those who have more than 250 employees, yes, things are going to go up because that was
it's 5. It's if you employ more than 4 people, your bill will go up
except that
by £2,500 per employee.
Yeah,
this is going to fall on the largest companies.
I just explained that it wasn't.
Frustrating.
That's the point. It's not just the large companies.
But what's tin-eared about this, if I may, is that, and I was a believer in, the kind of great red dragon coming in to sort of slay the demise of Britain, but I just found the budget incredibly clay-footed. This idea that you can handicap business, you can tax business to that extent when we've got such dire productivity in this country compared, for example, with our European neighbours, and at the same time expect growth. In fact, things have got so bad, we're currently, as we speak, seeing our Prime Minister in the pocket of one of the most unsavoury powers in the world, China, because how else are we going to boost our growth? But going back to the farmers, my father was a factor. Now, do you know what a factor is? No, well, I wouldn't expect you to, because Labour historically have a very, very bad track record when it comes to understanding rural affairs.
My family from Lancashire, and my cousins are farmers, but no, I don't know what a factor is.
Is a farmer and an estate manager.
Okay.
And in Scotland, historically, I agree, it's unsavoury for many in the Lothian belt who vote SNP, but you have the smallest number of individuals owning the largest amount of land anywhere in Europe. So you have these giant estates, that huge amounts of land, with a bit of shooting and hunting and all the sorts of things that Labour parties don't want, and also some agriculture. And the problem is the yield on those giant estates is minimal. How do you earn X amount of money from half a mountain? So what you've got, therefore, is these extraordinarily feudal setups, not just in Scotland, but mainly in Scotland and also in parts of England, which go against the democratic grain. And I agree, it's uncomfortable. The alternative is you write off the primogeniture idea, which predominates in all these farming families, incidentally, if we want to get sexist about it, and you go the French model. But if you divide up and repackage and downsize all your little farms, what you end up with is huge amounts of subsidy being required to have your farmers deliver a good, healthy yield. And so the choice has to be made. Is it a political one, which Labour's gone with, or is it one that actually ensures we deliver decent yield from our land in this country? We're a massively high importer of food. And at the moment, Labour, as they did with the fuel crisis, by the way, I back that decision, but it was so poorly handled. And you should just go in, by the way, as a turbo and generate heat in every old person's house we go into, Jerry, and then we wouldn't have a problem. But you've done the same thing with the farmers, and you've alienated them. And that's the problem.
This is just a one-woman white noise machine.
You should know. I have to pick you all up on the fact that you haven't answered the question. Will farmers blocking roads be treated the same as Just Stop Oil protesters?
No.
But shouldn't they?
Well, they're not going to be protesting in the same way. Just Stop Oil protesters were scaling really enormous bridges and, cutting off the ability to move. You just have to have one tractor on the A9 to understand that automatically the road is blocked and you're going to have to sit behind a herd of cattle. I mean, one of my jobs as a child was, basically flirting with the tailback of cars to stop them coming out and booting my dad one. By definition, farmers know how to block roads, and they do it with great grace and good manners.
I always remember driving my dad's combine harvester down a road, and there was a car that approached us, and normally you would expect the car to reverse, and it refused to. So I lowered the cutter bar and started it going and gradually inched forward. That car has never reversed so fast in its life.
I'm not sure I'd take on a combine harvester either.
Actually, the real answer to your question is it depends what they do. If they break the law and they break it in a very bad way, they will be dealt with. But
there are people in the farming community who think that they should learn a lot of lessons from French farmers.
Yeah, French farmers, they're French, aren't they? They're just sort of...
They are indeed French, Jerry.
Incredibly effective at
but
striking.
They can be very
French
effective
farmers.
in their protests.
They can be very rebellious. They can be very unpleasant. But that's the French way of doing things. That's not the way we do things over
Just
here.
a little light drizzle of xenophobia coming from this side of the desk.
No, not xenophobia. I voted Remain, for God's sake. Unlike Mr. Dale, I imagine.
You imagine correctly.
Yes.
Let's move on to a text question from Kevin, who says, should Keir Starmer trust a word the Chinese government says after they so blatantly tore up our agreement on Hong Kong? Now, Keir Starmer today became the first Prime Minister since Theresa May, so I've forgotten how to pronounce her name, to meet with the Chinese President Xi Jinping, and said he wants a strong UK-China relationship. Catherine, we started with you last time, didn't we? Let's start with Alys.
Thanks for coming to me, because this is one of those. This is one of those questions where it's difficult to have a sort of a pithy answer, because frankly you have to be pragmatic when it comes to China. It's too big. 1 in 9 people are Chinese. It's a massive trading partner and of immense geopolitical and strategic importance. So Keir Starmer's right to be talking to them. Of course, you need to be careful. Of course, you need to be mindful of their human rights abuses. This isn't a democracy. It's not a friend to us. But we need to deal with them, and that's the boring, pragmatic answer to the question.
Catherine?
We need to cooperate and compete and challenge with China. They are our 4th largest trading partner, but that doesn't mean that you don't have honest conversations and set out your concerns. And that's exactly what David Lammy did last month, where they talked about trade, but they'd also talked about the concerns that we have about their support for Russia and about human rights.
The interesting thing is that our exports to China have increased over the past, I think, 3 years, from 20 billion a year to 33 billion a year, which I was really surprised by that. Jerry?
The first question that Kevin asked is about tearing up the agreement with Hong Kong. They didn't. We came to the end of the lease. That was the end of it.
No, but they have gone against the terms of that agreement since.
Yes. But what did we expect? What did we expect? Why do you think Chris Patten, who was the governor of Hong Kong, was in tears when the Union flag came down? Because he knew what the Chinese were going to do. But they didn't tear up the lease. They tore up what they agreed to do. But we expected that, unfortunately. Chinese are a large military force.
Yeah.
No, are a large military
Tessa's
force.
hand was about to...
No, what's she going to do? Don't.
He's already failed the French.
French? No, the Chinese, are pretty dangerous people, but they're important players in the world stage. We can't ignore them. We need them for trade. It's always a balance, isn't it?
It's so
you do not
reasonable,
look like
Jerry.
a younger version of Joanna Lumley,
Do you know, once
Funny enough, a friend of mine said that to me this afternoon.
I expect you to get a bottle of Bolly out and just...
it's lucky you said Joanne Lumley, because there's almost no other octogenarian that I would be flattered to be likened to.
younger version.
Well, once I write about very old veterans, and one of them called me up like 2 or 3 years ago. Phyllis, she's 100, to give you context. She said, "You're on the telly, Tessa." I said, "I'm not, Phyllis, I'm talking to you." She said, "You're on the telly, BBC 2. So I think, "Oh, Jinx, I better go and check out the telly." So I go and switch on the telly. I'm like, "Phyllis, that's Joanna Lumley, and she's 34 years older than me." But thanks.
Anyway, back to China.
Yeah, China. So What's interesting about this is the timing, this kind of effort that Keir Starmer's made to love bomb the Chinese. And Keir Starmer love bombing was oxymoronic in the first place, but he's gone out and he's sort of front-footed in Rio de Janeiro when Trump's big electoral stance was be hawkish with China. So if we're talking about the way in which Ukrainian relations will impact on our inverted commas special relationship with Trump, I would suggest that this actually is extraordinary language or messaging to be sending to America, who is all for putting 60% taxation on Chinese trade. So I just want to float that out there. I, on the other hand, have no problem with Keir Starmer talking truth to power when it comes to the Chinese. But sadly, we don't really know what happened because the press were muscled out of the room by Xi Jinping's bodyguards when the questions got a little bit fruity around human rights, not just in Hong Kong, but the way in which it affects us. Do you know how many visas we've given to people from Hong Kong? And I back this fully, but anybody want to posit a guess as to how many visas has been issued?
130,000.
176,407. Now, if you subtract that off the 650,000 migration number, that would solve a few Labour problems. So it really is in Keir Starmer's interest to try and get things a bit more shipshape. And if I may, because I met his son, just give a shout out for Free Jimmy Lai, because I can, because we have freedom of the press here, and they can't in China.
Not according to Alison Pearson.
Well, have you got a text on that?
We may have a question on that later. It depends on our listeners.
This is a media mogul, a political activist who's been in prison imprisoned by the Chinese. He's a frail man. He's been in solitary confinement for trumped-up charges, collusion in inverted commas, with foreign powers. And he was in a really bad state when we last saw him. And Free
And
Jimmy Lai.
his son was on the Andrew Marr show a couple of months ago.
Yeah, it's a really moving son. He's incredibly important that we get him home.
Right.
It is important that we always have kind of these honest conversations, but it's also when Keir Starmer is at the G20 now and prioritising jobs and prosperity and security, and I think that's really important that we have the international trade and we have those relationships, and that we're proudly being able to ensure that we get the kind of investment we want to see in our country.
Wouldn't it just be easier just to be a bit more ballsy and say, look, let's just I know it's not popular with the electorate and it goes against the democratic will of the Brexit vote, but even the head of the Bank of England said it, forget moseying around Trump and Xi Jinping, and let's just get into bed fully with our nearest and best trading partners, Europe.
So it's not quite as simple as that, though,
Why
because
not?
every single phone that is built in the world, whether it's an iPhone or whatever, is built with Chinese technology. Every single computer that is made is built with Chinese technology. You can't buy a laptop without Chinese technology. Yeah. So even if you wanted to go down that road, it's not really very possible.
Yeah.
Right, we'll take more of your calls in a moment. Paul, do keep listening. He says, Tessa Dunlop makes my blood boil. A foghorn, he's calling you. Have you ever been called worse than a foghorn?
Yeah, my nickname
Tessa?
at school was Gabby.
I can't think why. 8:33 news headlines on LBC with Daryl Jackson.
Russia says it will give an adequate response if Ukraine fires long-range US missiles into Russia. The move has been approved by the White House. Sir Keir Starmer has become the first Prime Minister to meet the Chinese president since 2018. He says it's important for both countries to have a strong relationship. And British Airways has been hit by an IT outage, which is causing delays to dozens of flights. BA's confirmed they're experiencing hold-ups as they work to resolve a technical issue affecting some internal systems. LBC weather, rain, sleet and snow for central areas tonight. Rain in the south and snow showers in the far north, a low of -6.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
No one's ever compared me to Joanna Lumley.
Honestly, it's like herding cats in the studio today. It's 8:36. Let me reintroduce my panel. Tessa Dunlop is next to me, historian, author and broadcaster. Next to her is Jerry Hayes, a barrister, former Conservative MP. To my right, Catherine Atkinson, who just told me she used to be a barrister. I'd love to see you two in a court battle, actually. It'd be very entertaining.
It would be fun.
She's Labour MP for Derby North, and Alys Denby is opinion and features editor at City AM. Still not offered me a column, though, but there we go. Let's do a tax question from Karen in North London. How can the Chancellor retain her job if she has committed a blatant misrepresentation on her CV when she would have been fired immediately in a financial services firm for doing this? I have 35 years of experience in financial services and have hired and fired dozens of people. Let's give a bit of background to this. Last week, Rachel Reeves edited her page on the business social network LinkedIn to remove a past claim that she worked as an economist at the Bank of Scotland. I thought it was the Bank of England.
It was Halifax.
Bank of England.
Right.
Yes.
Between 2006 and 2009. Instead, it now says she worked in retail banking at Halifax. Today, a spokesperson for the Prime Minister would not say whether the Chancellor has breached the ministerial code or not, only replying that Keir Starmer believes her focus on the health of the economy is the most important thing to him. Tessa.
You know, I saw this headline in the Telegraph and I thought, it's just a bit of light Rachel Reeves trolling and moved on, because aren't we all a bit fast and loose with our CVs, especially in the early years of your career? I mean, if make it till you fake it, or is it the other way? It's fake it till you make it.
You should know.
So I kind of, and there's lots of reasons why I feel quite... I'm critical of Rachel Reeves. I also think she's quite leaden-footed as a performer. I mean, I think Catherine, in a couple of years, you'll be braying at the door, but she's got that sort of unfortunate, slightly, that flat way of delivering, and everything she says is a bit flat, and I feel like we're going nowhere very fast. And so, I was hoping that her banking credentials actually were going to help shore up the economy, and then I listened to her budget, and I'm less sure. But I still don't think that a bit of creative editing on her CV is the end of the world. That's the truth.
Jerry?
I don't care. I really don't care. So she worked 6 years in the Bank of England as opposed to 10. She's an economist. You should see I'll tell you a bit about my CV. When I was a kid, I'll do this quickly. I applied for a job after leaving school to teach tennis, to teach sailing, and to teach all sorts of sports to a very wealthy. No, of course not. The point is,
they don't look
and horse riding. 1, I couldn't ride a horse. 2, I couldn't play tennis. And 3, I couldn't sail. But I thought, I'll go for the job and I'll just have a crash course and all these things. But it was the miners' strike, the very first one, so it didn't work. I don't care. I don't think Rachel Reeves is a very good chancellor. She's got they're all beige. They're all beige, aren't they? There's no excitement there. There's no passion.
They're technocrats. They're replacing people like you who blatantly lie on your CV as opposed to just a bit of creative editing.
Yeah, but I was 17, for God's sake.
Look, I think the problem here is that Rachel Reeves, ahead of the election, went round the city talking to businesses, having these smoked salmon, scrambled egg breakfast meetings to persuade the city that they could trust Labour, that she had this vision of securonomics and that the economy was safe in her hands. She delivers her first budget and immediately the OBR has to revise down its growth forecasts because it doesn't believe in the vision she's setting out, and that she's not going to be able to attract the investment and the growth and the innovation that we need. That's what matters. It doesn't matter what says on her CV. It matters that she went around telling businesses to trust her, and this is what she delivers.
Yeah.
Catherine, you've been shaking your head through that, particularly the OBR bit, but Alys is right. The OBR did revise down their growth forecasts.
Rachel Reeves has been smashing glass ceilings. I think that she has absolutely been taking...
glass ceiling in the Labour
She's a
Party.
woman.
Really? No, she's the first Chancellor in 800 years.
Jerry,
First woman Chancellor ever.
Had 3 female Prime Ministers.
First woman Chancellor ever. That is absolutely glass ceiling smashed. And she has had to fix the foundations of the economy. She has had to deal with not just the worst cost of living crisis and our public services choices on the floor. She is absolutely delivering the security and the stability that businesses and that our country is desperate for. And I think she is someone who is not afraid to take difficult questions and get them answered. She's not afraid to make difficult choices. And I think that there's lots of people that will try and bring her down. I think she shows incredible strength, and I'm really pleased that we have a Chancellor that is
But what about her
actually fixing
CV?
these things. She is an incredibly qualified Chancellor, and I think that I'm much more interested in what she is actually doing, and what she is doing is clearing up the mess of 14 years.
You've made that point quite often, but I mean, look. Tessa's right. I suspect everybody over the years has exaggerated their capabilities on a CV or sort of got the dates wrong or whatever. But she is being accused of breaching the ministerial code, and that is a serious allegation.
Well, then they can make it. But I have to say, as far as I'm concerned, she is a Chancellor doing a very difficult job, and one I'm really, really pleased to see her in charge of our economy in comparison to what we've seen to date.
It's extraordinary because you're a really intelligent woman. I'm totally in awe of you. You're a barrister. You've got 3 children. Talk about juggling. You're married to some military cool dude. And
he is quite cool. He is quite cool.
Really good.
I'm planning on keeping him.
I mean, yeah, I'm a bit jealous. I'm going to be honest. Only this. Like, Catherine is where it's at, okay, right now. And then you sit there, cool as a cucumber, and you basically defend the indefensible, because Rachel Reeves has served us a googly. And I sit slightly left of centre, and I wanted to give her a big love hug. And I'm all for a fanny in number 11. I'm all for...
Beg your pardon.
A woman,
Not a fanny. A fanny.
She could have done what the Conservatives did when they came in. She could have hiked up VAT. She could have delivered more austerity. She didn't. But
do you know what she did? She did something worse than that in some ways. She just threw a sort of cosh over the economy. It was like a go slow message. You're even slumping on tax to receptionists and GP surgeries. I mean,
we've just had an international investment summit where we got £63 billion of investment in this country.
Catherine.
Of course, she's had to make difficult decisions with the mess she inherited, but absolutely what we're going for, and no one is satisfied with the growth projections that we have so far. But I think what we need is that stable foundation and the stability to actually get more growth in.
You're going to be at number 11 next. I can see it.
VAT would actually be a much less distortive tax. Ideally, you would have a low and shallow VAT base, because it's the tax that is easiest to avoid, because you simply don't have to consume those things. National insurance is hitting businesses like childcare businesses, like soft play centres. We had an article in City M today from the soft play centre saying we're going to have to close. And these are small businesses that employ people on living wage who are going to be particularly hardest hit by this. And things like the effect this is going to have on the early years childcare sector is going to have huge ramifications across the economy for working mothers.
Absolutely, you don't need to tell me about the childcare sector. And certainly, I think you've got so many that have been going out of business. And we had lots and lots of promises when it came to childcare, and they didn't have any way of actually delivering it. And now,
what are you doing differently with the
hang on. This is not a question about childcare, but there may be.
Happy to answer questions about childcare.
Just because you keep saying the letter CV, Jerry, that
because I just need an answer.
What was the question?
You've had the answer that you're going to get. But Alan is a fan. He says, I've just looked up Jerry Hayes because he's so entertaining. The first reference was obituary. Is he aware of that? Well, he is now. And
I want to read your CV, Jerry. I'm really interested. I want to know how many sports there are on there.
Oh, quite.
Well, why don't you just say, look, she exaggerated, but who cares?
Well, you obviously do, otherwise you couldn't keep mentioning the letter CV.
Yeah.
You care?
No, because you didn't answer the question.
He's just spent 10 minutes saying he doesn't care.
Iain was asking you a question. And, you have a wonderful career. I really do hope so. But are you so terrified of the whips? Terrified of the whips that you can't see a single criticism of anyone.
OK, right. Let's move on to another very important question in just a moment. And, of course, don't forget our fun question for the end of the programme, which I know Catherine is really looking forward to that one. It's 8:46.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
8:48. Alys Denby, Catherine Atkinson, Dr. Tessa Dunlop, and I don't know why I said doctor there.
I like it because we've got two barristers. I need to fight back with something.
Jerry Hayes, KC. Are you a KC?
No, I'm not a KC.
I thought all barristers were KCs.
No.
Are you a KC?
I'm not a KC.
Oh dear.
Second round.
We've got the dregs of the barristers industry here tonight.
KCs on the show next time.
Right. Robbie in Chelmsford says, by breaking their agreed impartiality and coming out against the assisted dying legislation, are some Labour cabinet ministers killing off the bill?
Oh.
The Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, is the latest cabinet minister to say she's likely to vote against assisted dying at the end of next week, following on from the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting. However, the Work and Pension Secretary, Liz Kendall, and the Transport Secretary, Louise Haigh, have suggested they are in favour of the bill. Isn't this a bit sort of confected? It's a free vote. Why shouldn't cabinet ministers give their honest opinions on this?
Right.
Catherine, let's start with you.
I think that people have been asked direct questions and they've given direct answers.
And it would be a bit odd for Wes Streeting not to give an answer, given he's the Health Secretary. Presumably he would have to implement this.
It is a free vote. It's a conscience vote. I know that my colleagues are all thinking really deeply about this, and that will be the same for cabinet members. I think that they have positions, and I think that it's a really emotive subject. I think a lot of those who are campaigning have direct experience on both sides, and I think it is fair enough for them to give their views when asked.
What's your view?
I personally am concerned about delivering. I think I would pay tribute to Kim Ledby. She has worked really hard to listen to concerns.
I'm sensing a big butt coming here.
Well, I think that she has put in some real safeguards. My concern is about how they're actually delivered. So for me, it's not just about a point of principle. I want to understand how it would be delivered. And yes, they put in not only that it would have to be the last 6 months of life with a terminal diagnosis, and that there would be doctors and a High Court judge. I think my concern is how that will actually be delivered. And certainly I'm sure you will have seen our justice system at the moment
is collapsed.
It's in a complete mess. And my concern about actually being able to do this in a way that is robust in the kind of timescales that we're looking at, I'm worried about how it would be delivered.
So you're going to vote against?
Yeah, I don't feel comfortable in voting for something without understanding fully how it would be delivered.
I'm with you.
Alys.
I was working in Parliament in 2015, I think the last time Parliament debated this, and it was a really fascinating debate to watch. It was absolutely a conscience vote. MPs spoke from all sorts of different perspectives across party lines. I think it's rightly a question of a deep moral question that it's right that Parliament should debate. And in any case, this won't be a binding vote. If it passes through, I expect the government will think very seriously about how they might implement assisted dying. But yeah, ultimately, I think this is a really difficult, deep ethical question. And it's one that also encounters the capacity of the state, the ability to carry it out. And this is one thing that I think is really worrying. I think that the kind of cult-like devotion to the NHS we have in this country makes it particularly inimical to having that ethical discussion. Because I worry that you'll get some kind of slippery slope where people feel that in order to protect the NHS, they have to take their own lives. That's a real concern. Though ultimately, if I was in a position of I was terminally ill and in terrible pain, I would want to have the choice to end my life. And if I was, and I'm glad I'm not in Parliament debating this, that's probably where I'd come down in the end.
Tessa.
First of all, just on the sort of political question of whether it's appropriate that Labour's, the big hotshot of the Labour Party, Wes Streeting.
Yeah.
He's the most effective communicator, he's the most effective minister, he's the one to watch going into the future. Do we think that the Labour Party will fight its next election with Keir Starmer in charge? I have my doubts. If it's not clear, who will it be? So if I was somebody, for instance, quite new to the Labour Party, looking for a seat at the big table, I would be trying to work out how I could impress Wes Streeting and do what he wants me to do. And that might impact on my decision on an ethical question, which is apparently whip-free. I think he's made it very clear that as the head of the health service, he doesn't want this burden put upon the system. And so I do think there has been a bit of pressure. That said, having spent most of the last 10 years working with the extreme elderly in very close quarters, and having witnessed my own father some time back dying from a very long and drawn out and unpleasant cancer, I worry about the pressure put on those very ill people. There's an extraordinary desire in that final furlong of life to just thrash it out to the end line, and the feeling that maybe they'd be thinking, oh, but perhaps I shouldn't, that's too much of my wife or too much of my neighbours, or I worry about that just being weirdly, for some of them, for a lot of them, an extra burden to carry when they're already fighting it across the finish line. And so on a personal level, if I had the privilege of a vote, I would vote against it, but not because I wanted to curry favour with Wes.
You're not accusing Catherine of that, I hope.
No, but I'm suggesting that if Catherine wants to do well and be noticed by Wes, then might be sensible to note what he wants.
I think you all probably know lots and lots of MPs, and actually a lot of them are absolutely able to think for themselves, and I don't think that they're going to change their views.
That's the question. The question's asked directly about whether this is appropriate, the way in which Wes has come out and very deliberately not only said he's not going to vote for it, but the reasons why.
But I don't think most backbench MPs in the Labour Party are going to sort of cast their vote in this on the basis of whether they're sucking up to Wes Streeting or not.
But it's implied in the question. Yeah, it was implied in the question that has he thrown the result, if you like.
We really should do a podcast, shouldn't we?
Yeah, we should. I was waiting for you to say it.
Yes. It's really weird. It sounds like an old politician, which I am. But, I agree with everybody in this one. I would, I do.
But we're not all agreeing with each other.
Well, no, but
you kind of are on the
basics.
essence
on the
of
what you're all saying is, one, that there are some people, and my mother-in-law was exactly the same. She had a terrible terminal illness, and she said, Jerry, if only I could just press the button. And you think, God, yeah, absolutely right. But then you think, in reality, going back to what Catherine said, how do you make it deliver? Going back to what you said, how do you sort of say to elderly people, well, you're not being a burden? It's the old slippery slope. And also, it's private members' legislation. It won't have the same scrutiny.
I think it's had a lot of scrutiny.
I really But it won't. I mean, I don't know how long the second reading debate is, but I suspect it's not the whole day, is it?
It's dead.
MPs are really thinking long and hard about this. There have been a huge number of briefings. I certainly don't think they're going to be changing their views just to impress people. They are taking this really seriously. And I do think that when they come to cast their vote, they'll have done so on the basis of a lot of consideration.
But arguably, I was being a little glib there, but I think the broader point was, Wes sets out his stall with all the sort of NHS furniture forefronting what is effectively, in many ways, a moral issue. Yeah. And that has implications for the way in which some people will vote.
His argument on that was complete rubbish, because I think most people, or most of the estimates are that there would be fewer than 1,000 people that would take advantage of this if it went through. That's not going to be a massive burden on the NHS.
No, I don't think it should be. I don't think cost is the lens through which it should be looked at. But if you are looking at it that way, it's likely to save money, because the NHS spends most money in the final few weeks of people's lives.
I don't think it's the
miserable way to look at it. But
time for one more quick question from Beth in Norbury. Is Ed Sheeran right to say that Band-Aid hurts Africa and dehumanises Africans, and the people involved in it are guilty of having a white saviour complex? Now, the singer will be featured in the upcoming 40th anniversary remix of Do They Know It's Christmas, which combines part of the... Don't sing it, Tessa, please. Which combines parts... And Alys, we certainly don't want you to sing it, given what you said earlier. Or was that in the break? I can't remember. Which combines parts of the previous 3 recordings into one new version. He says he wasn't asked for his permission to be included in this version and wouldn't have given it if he had been, adding that he now agrees with the Ghanaian English singer Fuse ODG, popular music beat combo, Your Honour, yes. Who says projects like Band-Aid and also Comic Relief dehumanise Africans and destroy our pride and identity in the name of charity. Tessa.
I was 10 when the Bob Geldof Band-Aid, Do They Know It's Christmas came out, and it was a very painful memory. I was dressed in a second-hand leotard and put at the front of the stage waving a ribbon in front of an audience in Pitlochry, Highlands of Scotland. And it took me about another decade to live that down. Meanwhile, I came home and all the farming community very quickly latched onto the fact that all the money that flooded Ethiopia, because at the time there were two outstanding memories. I have one of the brown leotard and the other one of these Ethiopian children with their distended bellies, and those were the sort of at that time in the early 80s, but flooded the market. So any farmers that were managing to cobble together an existence in Ethiopia were flattened by all this distorted charity aid that flooded in. Since then, and it's a sign of our times, because Ed Sheeran is referencing a 2014, 10 years ago, record that he was in on when we hadn't got our heads around the idea of white saviour. I champion heavily a different part of the world, Romania, and I know they've always felt like they've got this frozen image that people only see them as the basket case or the charity case of Europe. And arguably, I think Africa lumbers under a similar problem in terms of being a continent.
Just looking at the time, 20, 30 seconds each if you can, Alys.
Sorry.
I think
Does that 20, 30 seconds mean that we still got time for Tessa and Jerry to be able to sing us out?
Well, possibly not. Alys.
I think Ed Sheeran is embarrassed to be in this single because it's a bit cringy and naff.
I love it. Best Christmas song, I think.
He's also got a single out this Christmas, so he's competing with himself.
Christmas song.
Yeah, I'm sort of sympathetic to the idea that Africa needs more than just charity. It needs economic emancipation. It needs to grow, and people need the freedom and not to be patronised. Though, people want to give money. Is that the worst thing in the world?
Catherine.
I mean, I do think that we need to try and ensure that we have these debates in what can be in a respectful way. But I do think that if he didn't give us permission to have his voice used, I can understand why he's a bit cross.
It's a compilation. It's
anyway.
a best of, really, isn't it? So,
Jerry?
I'm fed up with being told that I should suffer with being full of white guilt. I think it's ridiculous, I think it's out of date, and I think it's rather insulting. And that's why I'd rather support Kemi Badenoch.
Badenoch. She's your MP and you can't even pronounce her name.
She is also a very good friend.
Well, obviously not that good.
how have you got from Ed Sheeran to Kemi?
Well, because she says that sort of thing as well.
I've broken my own rule in that I never talk about Christmas before December.
Quite right. You go up even further in my estimation. I'm with you on that. Austin says, cross-question with the Bash Street kids, magnifique. But we haven't finished yet, because our fun question is this from Laura in Luton. Biden's statement on the missiles yesterday on the edge of the Amazonian rainforest saw some online commentators joke that it looks like he's joining the I'm a Celebrity camp. But which reality show should the outgoing president be appearing on after he leaves the White House? Alys.
Well, poor Joe Biden, I think, deserves to to be left alone. But one reality TV show of politicians I would like to watch is the last 5 leaders of the Conservative Party in a sort of Hunger Games style ballot out who gets to be leader. I think that would make great entertainment.
Catherine?
Well, my political superpower is I can eat lots and lots and lots of cake, so I'd go for Bake Off.
I thought we were putting Joe Biden in a reality show, and I think if I'm going to be really cruel, it would have to be Strictly, wouldn't it? Biden on Strictly.
He can barely walk, poor man.
I rest my case.
Well, that's why I put him on ice. It'd be fun, wouldn't it? Cruel, but fun.
It would be very cruel indeed. Now, tomorrow's panel on Cross Question includes the Liberal Democrat Home Affairs spokesperson, Lisa Smart. She appeared on this programme the week after the general election, and she absolutely stormed it. I remember saying to the Lib Dem chief whip, Wendy Chamberlain, you need to put her on the front bench. Look where she is now. That's what happens when you appear on this programme, Catherine. You immediately get a huge promotion. We have also the Conservative Shadow Housing Minister, David Simmons, the Director of the Reform think tank and former Tory advisor, Charlotte Pickles, and the broadcaster and journalist, Afua Hagen. Or is it Hagen? But thank you very much indeed to all of you for appearing on the show tonight. Coming up in the next hour, if this would scroll down my screen because it's disappeared, after the news, we're going to talk about this.
At Christmas time, we let in light and we banish shade.
That's Ed Sheeran's solo bit from the Band-Aid 30, which the panellists were just talking about. He says he agrees with these claims from the Ghanaian English singer Fuse ODG that charity projects like Band-Aid inflict harm on Africa, his words not mine, by perpetuating damaging stereotypes and fueling pity in a way which dehumanises the people of Africa. Is he right? Are projects like Band-Aid and Comic Relief just examples of white saviorism and actually demeaning to African people, or do you think that if it raises money and awareness, then what's the problem?
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, the Prime Minister says he won't go into operational details over reports the UK could allow Ukraine to use British weapons within Russia. President Biden has given Kyiv the go-ahead to use long-range US missiles. Former Deputy Assistant to the President under Donald Trump, Sebastian Gorka, has told LBC he thinks it's a bad decision.
It is one of the most egregiously irresponsible acts of any sitting president in